Again, thank you for taking the time to be part of our webinar today. I know it's close to the holidays, so we'll try to keep it short. All right. For the agenda today, we'll do a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about, talk a little bit about why you should learn Linux, and then go over the following commands and give you some fun facts about the commands and how they can be used, and then do a quick live demo. And your host today will be myself from our marketing team and Panos from our engineering team. And I will hand it over to you now, Pano.
All right, thank you, Jess, and thanks everyone for being here with us today. So yeah, before we dive into what we have for you today, like what we think as the top 5 Linux commands for network engineers, I wanted to take a step back and trying to justify why, as a network engineer, you should learn a little bit more about Linux, right? In the last, I would say, more than a decade now, right? I mean, the boundaries between the networking operating system and what's running on as a, kind of, let's say, generic operating system, as we know them, Linux, etc., are being blurred, right? The boundaries between the two. I mean, we see now more and more vendors, right? They support the ability to run VMs on their switches, routers, containers. They have kind of full-blown, I would say, system, right, running on them, right? Because hardware has improved over time, memory, CPU, right? So there's the ability to offer that environment to all users. Either you are, comfortable with Linux and the terminal or not. I mean, all or most like white label networking hardware runs on Linux, right? I have here only a couple of examples. OpenWRT on the Wi-Fi side, Cumulus Linux, which was acquired by NVIDIA. It's a full-blown Linux environment, right? And then you got to be part of this free open source software community. And I don't have anything, of course, against GUI environments, right? And Linux doesn't mean only terminal. Can have a nice GUI environment on Linux, but that's what comes to our mind, right? When we talk about Linux and let's say the CLI-based interface, it's what we all do when we configure a switch or a router, mostly, right? On one, right? So why would you do that, right? So it's another powerful tool in your arsenal, right? You would be able to, of course, show that you know more other, you have broadened your horizon outside the network engineering only domain, right? And you can adopt new technologies much faster. Everything new that's being introduced out there, of course, first it's built as probably open source, right? Major open source tools and environments, we're familiar with them, right? Like Docker, for example, right? Etc. Docker is not like necessarily like open source and publicly maintained, but there is a equivalent open source version, right? You're going to be vendor independent if a vendor supports Linux environment and you are comfortable with general Linux, any flavor of Linux. Of course, there are many different versions, BSD, Ubuntu, Debian, etc., right? But you'll be able to adjust pretty quickly. And you'll be able to prototype and automate faster by using everything around the terminal and what comes with like scripting, be able to use open source tools. Most of them, there's, of course, for many tools, there's a enterprise paid version. Many vendors also offer their tools for using for your personal kind of needs or training or educational purposes for free, right? So you'll be able to do all that and become a more rounded, I would say, engineer, right? Or software engineer. After all we write is software, right? At the end of the day. So how can you get started? Like, how can you get access to a Linux terminal? If you're, of course, on Mac, most likely you have already used your Mac OS terminal. right? Windows, I've been using the Cygwin environment for decades now. Before WSL came along, for the ones that don't know, WSL stands for Windows Subsystem for Linux. So Windows introduced a kind of native support of Linux on Windows, right? So you can enable it, set it up, it's a few clicks. And it's kind of the equivalent of the macOS terminal. Actually, when I first tried the WSL, I was kind of happily surprised to see that Microsoft was embracing this, Ubuntu environment on Windows. And at first it was rough with some rough edges, right? But that is becoming better and better. WSL includes more networking system, kind of gives better access to the hardware and other resources, right? So it's becoming a more complete Linux environment on Windows. And then if you open a free account, even like on any of the public providers, you can spin up a Debian Ubuntu box, I would say, and get your hands dirty. And if you want to play with some hardware, you can spend $50 or $100 and buy Raspberry Pi. They become more and more powerful. I started with Raspberry Pis when they had like 10, 100 interfaces. Now they're at 1 gigabps, like everything else these days. And now maybe the next version is going to be 2.5. They added PoE and other Wi-Fi, obviously, right? And other, I would say, network-related improvements. Or you can use desktop and laptop and install Linux, right? So yeah, with all that, I'm gonna jump to what we have included in this presentation. Of course, this list here is not exhaustive. There are so many other things, tools, utilities on our website. We blog a lot about these things, right? Over the years, we blogged a lot. You can find lots of what we think is related, right? But the first utility I'm included in this list is nmap. Nmap is almost 30 years old, stands for Network Mapper. And its first and basic and, of course, still existing capability was to be able to go in the network and be able to do a scan and get, kind of a list of all the hosts in a specific network, right? So it was a hacking tool and still can be a hacking tool. Anything can be a hacking tool. But yeah, nmap over the years has become very powerful, supports all major platforms. That's actually, yeah, they have libraries and stuff for Windows, Linux, and Mac, right? And I'm sure like other platforms too. I'm sure they probably support like Android or something, right? But I'm not sure exactly. Yeah, over the years actually has evolved a lot as a tool. There's a whole scripting language you can use to run if you want something very custom. If you think of something probably exists already out there regarding nmap that has to do with scanning networks, testing networks, and if not, then you can use their scripting language, right, and write your own library. Fun fact, it has appeared in more than 20 movies. I guess when they want to show something that looks smart by hackers and there's text on the screen to show that computers are thinking, right? Nmap is a good way to do it. And yeah, next time you watch any of these movies, pay attention and you might be able to spot it, right? So right, the next one is TCP dump. So TCP dump, again, if you're a network engineer, you know what that is, right? And there are many tools out there, of course, that give you the ability to do packet capturing at scale, on many interfaces, on lots of hardware, right? And then they give you the ability to slice and dice the data, get reports, do alerting, etc., right? And behind most of these or all of these tools is TCP dump, or a flavor of it. So TCP dump, obviously, gives you a dump of all the traffic that goes in and out of an interface. Of course, can be any type of traffic, not only TCP, UDP, ICP, etc., right? And it's a close cousin of Wireshark. Maybe you're familiar with both. Wireshark has both like a terminal version, but also like very complete GUI environment. Again, nothing against GUI environments, right? You can use whatever tool makes your life easier at the right time for the right job, right? But with of course, the GUI environment, you have a nice graphical interface to look slowly at packets and like dive in and see what is going on, right? With the CLI, obviously, you have the text output in a log format, whatever you want to call it, And then you can add filtering, other kind of parameters there. And then goal, of course, of when you do that on the terminal is that you are able to get this text, and if you write your own scripting and logic to do your own parsing, right? Custom parsing for whatever is important to you. And that comes as an extension of being comfortable with the terminal, being able to write, to use a scripting language like Bash or Python, etc., and use a tool like TCP dump on specific host, right? To capture the traffic and analyze the way that you want for troubleshooting, monitoring, or other purposes, or reporting. The next one is Netcat. So Netcat is only 20 years old. So these tools have been all around for a while, right? The good thing is, of course, that they are either distributed by default on many Linux or other operating systems, right? Or you can install them very easily because they are available on public repositories, right? If you do like something like use an apt controller versioning, right? You can say apt install TCP dump. It's already installed with one command. You have the tool available. So Netcat now is another utility, in that group that gives the ability to read and write on network interfaces. I remember when I was, kind of in college, we're getting like the first kind of exposure to networking. We use that Netcat to open like a port on one host, let's say to listen, and then from another host we would send commands or text, right? So because kind of was a very rough and crude texting or messaging, let's call it platform, right? Of course, you can do more advanced things with Netcat. You can, send messages, right? Listen to ports, listen to look at traffic, etc. That's an example here, a very simple example I have how you can use Netcat on the bottom there, how to check, for example, if from this specific host you can access Google on port 443. Right? So with this, you can use, of course, you can use it to test a specific port on a firewall is open, if you can receive traffic, etc. Right? Fun fact from Netcat's README, it reads, if you're affiliated in any way with Microsoft Network Get Alive, always key in control. Very opinionated. The author of Netcat is very opinionated. I mean, I found a music good sense of humor, but yeah, I want to share it with you, right? So the next one is iPerf. So iPerf, I guess, is not as well known, or although again, this tool has been around for a while also, right? Again, 20 or so more years. So what iPerf is pretty much is a way to test bandwidth between two hosts. So imagine you're on one network or whatever network, you have routing between A and B. You can start on one side what we call an iPerf server or receiving of traffic, and on the other side an iPerf client. So you can send, let's say, either like as much traffic as possible between A and B, and you can see, okay, can I pass 50 or 100 or 1 gigabps of TCP traffic or UDP traffic, right? So you need to control both the sender and the receiver, and of course along those along that kind of testing or traffic generation, it offers metrics like jitter and packet loss and others actually, right? So again, after so many years, more and more features and metrics have been added to these tools. There are two versions of iPerf. So 3 is not like a newer version of 2. That's kind of misunderstanding usually. So there are two independent versions. There's no beef between each other, right? So there are two independent teams. The reason that happened is that the initial implementation of iPerf 2 had some limitations, and then a group of people decided to, okay, let's rewrite from scratch and kind of offer the same functionality, but at the same time, it wasn't compatible to each other, right? So if you're using iPerf, you have to use the same version of sender and receiver, iPerf 2 or iPerf 3 on both ends. Both are being right now maintained, and you can use them either or. I mean, I use any of the two, whatever is available at any given time. unless there's a specific feature that one has and the other doesn't. And I have more details about this on our blog, right? If you look on our website about iPerf and what we talk about all these things, right? So what we like to call, iPerf is the tool that proves that it's not a network, right? Of course, passing like 1 Gbps of bandwidth doesn't mean that the network is okay. There are other metrics that you need to consider depending on what you are looking for, right? Again, like jitter or packet loss or other things. But it's a parameter that usually take into consideration, right? When we, let's say, deploy a network, we want to do the initial testing, initial kind of validation of our design, right? And implementation. And the last one is speed test. So of course, everybody is familiar with the web browser speed test. UCLA has been around for a while. They have thousands of public internet servers. So speed test is the cousin of iPerf. They're cousins, right? So with iPerf, as we just covered, you need to control source and destination. And with speed test, you have an internet-based server that you don't control, is maintained by somebody else, unless you want to deploy your own, right? You can do that. But basically, like in the typical use cases where there's like a bunch of servers, and typically we run it on our browser, or we ask our whoever we're helping, right, or ourselves, we run go to speedtest.net or speed.cloudflare.com, right? And we run a speed test. However, many of these providers here offer like command line utilities to do the same thing, right? For example, NDT, which is a lab nonprofit that is supported by Google, has like a client. You can download it and run it on your Windows or Mac or whatever like operating system, right? Cloudflare, a year or two ago, actually, and actually the last 5 years has been going more and more to that kind of user experience type of monitoring by offering great tools to the community and the public. And they have another utility they call it MAC that does exactly the same thing. Of course, Cloudflare has a big CDN network around the world that are able actually to give you very good like metrics and measurements around that. NDT has around, not around, like a few, I would say a few dozen servers around the world. And then UCLA then has like thousands, right? It's been around the longest. Actually, UCLA didn't have a command line utility. They have one that's called speed test. Actually, you can download from their website. They introduced that, I think, a few years ago. And yeah, I mean, it's free for private use. And yeah, I mean, what we call like the speed test is when we say we try to prove that it's not the internet. Of course, again, with a caveat, right? Bandwidth up and down doesn't capture or reveal everything about the user experience, right? So yeah, I mean, these are the top 5 utilities we kind of think that are, of course, there are so many others, right? Who cannot like leave out of a list like that, things like ping or traceroute, right? But we know those pretty well. Anybody can use them. I would say they're a little bit more advanced, or what we would call like substantial, let's say, utilities, right? They offer a little bit more information for us network engineers and network professionals. And yeah, with all that, I would say, how does NetBeans come into play? Just one slide, like NetBeans, of course, we are heavy users of Raspberry Pis. We offer this ability to run this type of utilities, what we just talked about, iPerf, speed test, right, etc., at a scale. So you can always log into a machine, remote machine, or your local machine, and run a speed test, right, or run a ping test or a traceroute test, right, and troubleshoot locally. But what happens when you go and do that from multiple vantage points around your network or around like the world, right? So we offer this agent-based monitoring solution, heavily Linux-based, right? But we offer also clients for Mac OS and Windows, right? Or with everything that we just talked about for monitoring, troubleshooting, reporting, and network testing, right? So yeah, I mean, for example, to give you just a sense of what this looks like, other than our dashboard, and I don't want to spend too much time here, right? You have a dashboard where you run all these tests continuously, right? Like a ping test, or a traceroute test, have the results here with historical and all the, like scale you can imagine for dozens or hundreds or even thousands of these users or endpoints that run on different parts of your network. And because, of course, we are heavy users of Linux, etc., we also give you a terminal on its agent that you can do things like what we just talked about, right? For example, you can run, and let's say, a Google-based NDT speed test. If you are doing something like an one-off troubleshooting, or you can do that from the dashboard, right? So you see here, I just typed the command. It gave me average speed down and then up. And then we have also all the historical information where we run these tests on schedule on a continuous basis, where you can go and troubleshoot over the course of longer period of time, right? And with that, I'm done. Thank you all so much about participating and being here. I don't see any questions, right, Jess?
Nope, I don't see any questions either. So you did such a good job of explaining all the commands. No one has any questions.
Right.
But
Yeah. I
thank
mean,
you.
and yeah, I mean,
Hmm?
I would, if you are, want to dig more into this, go to netbiz.net last blog, search for Linux here, and see what we've been talking about over the course of several years, and how we try to share this knowledge with everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. While you're on the blog there, all you do is click the Linux category, and then you can see all of our Linux posts that we've ever posted. They're definitely some of our most popular, all of them written by our very own Panos. So also while you're on the website, if anyone has any follow-up questions that you forgot or thought of after, feel free to go to our website and use the intercom chat function to ask us any questions, or you can hit the try it button and schedule a demo if you would like to see the dashboard live and ask any questions there as well. We'd be happy to answer them. And the recording for this webinar will be available on our website tomorrow. And we hope that you have a great holiday and really appreciate you attending the webinar.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.